Welcome and bienvenidos to the Eco Poder podcast. Very happy to be joined by my colleagues here in the state of Florida. We have a very important conversation to cover today. This podcast is a space where we both share stories at the intersection of environmental justice and our comunidad, talking about the real issues that are impacting our gente, right? I'm Brianna Guerrero again, like I said, very happy to be joined by my colleagues. I will be passing it on to y'all to quickly introduce yourselves to let the folks know who are listening in today and watching us. Who are you? How are you? How are you coming into the space today? Se lo paso a Marcelo primero.
Hey all, thank you Brianna, thank you all for having me. I am Marcelo Balladares. I am the Everglades Restoration Organizing Representative with Sierra Club Florida. I am doing okay, I guess. It's been a lot of pretty hectic these past couple of days, weeks, months, past year. Been pretty hectic, but I've been able to find a bit of solace in the sort of solidarity that I've been able to find with other members of my community, other groups that we've been organizing with, and seeing that support come out has been really helpful in getting me through these tougher times. But yeah, I'm grateful to be here.
Hey everybody, Carolina Wasmer, Florida State Program Director at Poder Latinx. Excited to be here today to have this conversation. Especially, it's nice to be in familia. It's nice to be with people fighting the great fight. It's really important for us to continue knowing that we're not alone and that there's a big community out there and that we're being resilient for those that might be voiceless or that are scared to come out. Who feel like they are being persecuted in a country where they thought they would be safe, fleeing from persecution in other countries. People who are looking for better opportunities, economic opportunities for their families to be safe. I know that, that's one of the things that reminds me, that grounds me, is that we're here for a better future for our families as well as those friends and families around us.
Thank you. And it's amazing to be here with both of you, Marcelo and Caro. And of course, you too, Bri. I'm Alejandro Flores. I'm the Florida State Program Coordinator. And how I'm feeling, Bri? Honestly, I wasn't feeling very good this week with the current news about what's going on and environmental justice protections being rolled back once again. However, as I mentioned before we went live, I actually just arrived from tabling at a university in the area. And I got to talk to a lot of students, and it's really empowering to see the youth, like 17, 18-year-olds, like actually coming up to your table, talking about sustainability, talking about what's to come, how can they get involved, and how can they help? Because they're the future at the end of the day. They're the people who are going to be making decisions once they graduate, and they're going to be shaping this country. So it's great to see the youth like so involved. So honestly, I'm feeling empowered.
Thank y'all, and my spirits are high with you here in this podcast episode today. Like many of you said, there's just a lot going on, especially when it comes to our immigrant undocumented community within, the nation across from east to west. I think everyone's feeling the burden of so much going on. So I really do appreciate all of you kind of coming in and joining us today, taking a moment out of your day. You're all, fighting the good fight where you are in the organizations and spaces that you advocate in. So I really do truly appreciate y'all taking the moment to meet with us today. And I also want to, I'm sure our audience feels the same way. They're excited for this, to hear information on how to get involved. But today we're looking at Everglades Detention Center, right? What is that? A lot of y'all probably are not even aware of what that means, depending on your location. If you haven't already, I'm sure it's been a big thing in the news recently. But we're getting down to the nitty gritty of why it matters to have this conversation and highlight this particular experience, and how it impacts both people and the planet, right? There's a lot of intersections when we talk about this place, both environmental and, like I said, the identities that our people are impacted by, right? The many layers I think on all systems of oppression. It's pretty much hitting the nail on all of them. So just excited to hear from you all. And we'll explore how Florida goes through those two different lenses, right? Environmental protections and immigrant justice. But yes, we're going to start off with Alejandro, who will give us an environmental context, and then Carolina will share how immigration policies intersect with these harms. And I also do want to say, I know there's been a nickname being thrown around. It's a negative nickname, and we're going to refrain from using and focusing on that in this episode. So that way the real issue at hand is focused on. This, it's a detention center. It's harming both people and the environment, and that's pretty much period, right? Like that's what it's doing. There's no jokes here. There's no. We're gonna take it serious as much as we can, and bring y'all the facts. So Alejandro, can you start by describing to us what's happening on the ground at the Everglades Detention Center, and why is this location so critical for the environment and our local communities?
Yeah, thank you so much, Brie, for that introduction. And honestly, I agree. There's a lot of propaganda going around, and a lot of people in even our industry have fallen victims of the propaganda, calling it like what the names they want to call it, like this outrageous, even comical names. But in all reality, it is what it is, a detention center that is harming our people and our environment and the future of the state. Because pretty much on the ground, the Everglades Detention Center represents a double crisis. It's a human and environmental crisis. This facility sits on land that is not only sacred, but also ecologically fragile. The Everglades filter our drinking water, protect us from flooding, and serve as a home to countless endangered species. Over 70 endangered species such as Florida panther, the manatees, and the wood stork actually live in the Everglades and are being affected by this. Building and operating a detention center here in the Everglades risks contaminating of our water supplies, destructing our wetlands, and worsening our flood risk for surrounding neighborhoods. For local communities, especially immigrants community around the area, it adds another layer of injustice. Families are already living with high energy burdens, pollution, and housing insecurity in Florida. We are actually one of the first states with the worst housing crisis in the country. And now they're being forced to live next to a prison that threatens their health and safety. Instead of investing in resiliency and conservation, we're putting vulnerable people and ecosystems in greater danger. And just to give you a very brief overview on why the Everglades are so important to us and why we're fighting this fight. Besides the human rights crisis that Carlos is going to go over to, the Everglades actually filter out the drinking water, and they provide water to the Biscayne aquifers, which provide water to over 9 million homes in Florida. And to put it into perspective, there's 20 million people in Florida. So just those 9 million homes, that's a lot. So also, they act as a climate buffer. The wetlands in the Everglades store carbon, helping mitigate the impacts of climate change. And also, they act as flood protection. And we know Florida gets flooded every time we get a hurricane. And nowadays, we're getting a hurricane very often during hurricane season. So we now more than ever, we need flood protection in our communities, especially towards South Florida. The Everglades absorb excess rainwater and storm surge, and they serve as a natural defense against hurricane and rising seas. However, if we contaminate that, if we kill not only the wetlands, but the mangroves that are in these sites, there's not going to be any more barriers against the rising sea level and against the storm surge. So the communities that are surrounding the Everglades, that are mostly low-income people that are already suffering with the issues that we already mentioned, are going to be having to face flooding that it's unprecedented. And as we know, a lot of home insurances in Florida do not cover flooding unless it comes from the sea. So if it's inland flooding, it's not covered by home insurances. And a lot of people don't know that. They think they're covered by the insurance. And when it comes to filing a claim, they end up being unhoused because their house is not livable anymore. It got destroyed by a flood, but the insurance are going to pay for that. So we're not taking that into account either. This facility, I want to highlight that is an example of environmental racism and political neglect. In Florida, we see over and over again that polluting industries, hazardous facilities, and now detention centers are placed in or near communities of color and immigrant neighborhoods. These are the same communities that face the greatest risk from hurricanes, rising sea level, and extreme heat, yet they are given the least protections.
Yeah, you definitely got into my next question for you, right? What's the broader pattern here when it comes to environmental justice? And I know you already mentioned environmental racism. And if anyone else wants to jump in on here to respond as well, but especially for communities of color, right? What does this mean for them, especially in Florida?
Bree, as we've mentioned in previous podcasts, Florida's ground zero for environmental vulnerability and political attacks to the environment. From the Everglades to urban neighborhoods along highways, our communities of color are treated as expendable. Decisions are made that sacrifice our health, dignity, and future while protecting corporate interests. And the Everglades Detention Center is not just about one facility. It pretty much reflects a larger pattern in our state where people of color are seen as disposable and sacred land as open for exploitation. This, like, literally last year, for the listeners that are not aware, we almost had golf courses, resorts, and theme parks built in state parks, protected land that is supposed to be passed down from generation to generation, that is also a home for many endangered species and endangered flora. That was all going to be bulldozed off just for some more golf courses. Like, if we needed more golf courses in Florida. So that's a pattern. We're seeing a lot of that in Florida.
Ditto to all of Alejandro's points. And that whole state parks thing was a really crazy fiasco. And I'm glad, in this past legislative session, we were able to get a bill passed to make that, impossible from happening again in the future, which, when you think about it, should be implied with state parks. But, in our great state of Florida, we do things a little differently. But on the topic of environmental racism, that's something that we've seen happen again and again, especially here in Miami, where I'm based out of. One of our other campaigns that we've been working on is an anti-incinerator campaign. And looking back at the history of that, with the first incinerator we had in Miami, which was dubbed Old Smoky, was started and based in a majority Black neighborhood in West Coconut Grove. And that was opened in 1925 and operated for 45 years until 1970. And it just was, it spewed toxic ash into the environment. And even though it was closed in the 70s, the effects of that were still felt for decades afterwards. And you see time and time again when, new incinerators or new facilities that are very high pollution emitters, you always see them end up in these neighborhoods that are either, majority Black or lower class. And it's something that happens time and time again, not just in Miami, but throughout Florida and, sadly throughout the nation. And that's part of the issues that we are trying to face in our, push for environmental justice and push for better environmental protections, is also acknowledging this sort of repeated racism in these moves that what I've seen a lot of the time, people are quick to dismiss because, there are certain, things like, oh, the pollution affects everybody. Like, yes, that's true. But there are repeated instances where certain peoples are, targeted, whether that be, on purpose or not, that ends up being the case. So that's something that we have to be able to not only acknowledge, but also, elevate and make that part of our decision making going forward.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate you sharing that, because I was just thinking to myself too, like, they say it's like an accident or it's it's like a coincidence almost, but like you said, it's a repeating pattern, and at the stake of a certain people, right? The same folks that are always being affected, and we can look at this throughout history. People being displaced, moved out into spaces that are landfills, pollution, or have higher levels of like lead or something like that in the area. So I definitely appreciate you kind of bringing that together for us, and Alejandro for giving us the perspective when it comes to the landscape of what this looks like, right? So people can kind of put a picture. And if you're listening to this right now, go and Google this, right? Go and look at pictures. I think it's really helpful to understand not just us talking about it, but seeing it firsthand through photos. And like we said, this isn't just about land and wildlife. It's also about people being detained there, right? So Carolina, can you kind of explain to us why the Everglades Detention Center has become such a powerful symbol of the immigration system's failures?
Definitely. Thank you, Brianna, and thank you, Alejandro, for everything you've shared, as well as Marcelo. They said this would be the worst of the worst, and that hasn't been the case, right? What they're doing right now is, getting a lot of people who are driving without a driver's license. What they're doing is, visiting people at work sites and intimidating them and picking them up. We have seen even DACA recipients end up in the Everglades Detention Center. And this is concerning because right now, inclusive with TPS holders, we know that they have been going through a particular process of on and off again due to the administration and having to also bear their lawsuits to make sure that they can have their papers in order. We're seeing this currently in Central Florida with driver's license as well. Many people right now are having difficulties renewing their driver's license, which puts them in danger if pulled over. So it's really important for our community to understand and to have to look for new opportunities in transportation and be able, and we don't have very good public transportation in Central Florida or in most of Florida. So our community really relies on independent vehicles. They have spent over $450 million that was allocated of our state funding to go to, other projects that would be more important, and only left $50 million to be able to devote to hurricane relief and anything that, can happen. As Alejandro was mentioning, when you buy a home, flood insurance is not included, it's separate. And we already know that in Florida, we're facing an insurance crisis. So it's no secret that we're spending more money on insurance. We're trying to do the best that we can for our kids to go to public school, to be able to get a good education. And we're seeing cutbacks in our community that really affect our Latino community. Nationally as well, whatever happens in Florida and happens in other states is seen and heard, and our community is scared. We know that there has been an uprise of what could be racial profiling, and our community is now saying, well, then maybe should we not speak Spanish in public? Can I be pulled over just by the way I look? Our community is resilient, and our community understands the importance of being in this country. And, they want to make sure that they're bringing the best of them. And they're just looking for an opportunity for the immigration system to actually work in their favor. And this detention center is an intimidation tactic to increase self-deportations. As you know, many of our individuals could have been detained when coming into this country to look for asylum and have already gone through a detention, process. And now they're scared to have to relive this. And so from what we're hearing in the community is a lot of fear, and making sure that they want to be there for their community. What we heard from legislators is there's a lot of Black and brown individuals being held in this detention center, a lot of youth or people of all ages, but it's basically, minorities, people of color who are being, taken to this facility. And all detention centers are pretty terrible from what I've learned recently. But this one being that it's basically, everything has to be brought in. So water, energy, the environmental aspect of this, if there's a leak or something of any magnitude of all these materials being brought into the Everglades. And as you guys were saying, you should definitely take a look. In the past, I was able to, ride on one of the boats and see the alligators, and it's beautiful to be out in the Everglades. But it's not a place where people should be living. It's not in conditions to work in. It's not in conditions where people, should be in temporary housing while their fate is being decided. And the fact that it's difficult for them to get legal advice or be able to speak to their attorney, the transparency that's missing when it comes through everything that's going on right now, and that our people are just being taken away with people in masks. It's not what the United States stands for. We stand to be the country of the free, of the opportunity until, giving you opportunity in court to speak and to say, why you're here, what's happening. And that's why, so many people came to this country looking for asylum. We understand that these countries where they're detaining a lot of people, we have a large, group of Venezuelans, Cubans, Haitians, and we know that these countries haven't gotten any better, as well as Nicaragua and South Florida. So, our community right now is being really resilient, and they want to make sure that they are able to stay properly and be able to contribute to Florida's economy.
Thank you. And as someone who's not from Florida, right, this helps me even understand the context of how this detention center has become such a powerful symbol for what's wrong with our system. We're willing to use taxpayer money to not only fund a project that we all knew was not going to be successful in doing whatever the cause or the mission was of that. But like Carolina said, right, like the fact that they're just willingly put people somewhere, allow environmental issues to impact their health, even though in their eyes, if like breaking a rule, it doesn't mean you have to be dehumanized. They're still, like how Alejandro said earlier, this is a human rights issue. I don't know if anyone else wants to add, but thank you so much for painting this picture for us. It's really important to understand like how we're exploiting vulnerable communities, right? We're going to go quick to a commercial break to hear from our sponsors, and we'll get back right into it after that. This episode was produced in partnership with Climate Action Campaign. For more information on climate wins and how to defend our climate, please visit www.actonclimate.com. Thank you, and now back to the episode. And I do want to say, right, correct me if I'm wrong, as someone who's learning from the outside in, with recent rulings, there's conversations to stop the expansion of the Everglades Detention Center, but the story isn't over. I think there's a lot of questions up in the air. Folks like I, who are not from the area, might not understand completely what's going on legally and at the legislative level. So Florida still faces some major environmental and immigration challenges, but the resistance is growing. Right, people are turning the page to this. People are looking it up. From the west to the east to the south, right? Everyone's turning their heads and seeing this. I feel like the media really blew this up when it first was announced. So again, very excited to have Marcelo, our special guest here today with us, joining the team. But we want to ask you, right, can you help us understand what's going on now that, it's set to close, but what does that really mean? And how can we hold policymakers accountable now and beyond this, right? So from your perspective, what does this recent ruling mean for both the Everglades ecosystem and then immigrant communities directly impacted?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. So I think August 22nd, August 21st, Judge Williams, who was presiding over the case, did issue an injunction on the detention center, ruling that they had 60 days, I believe, to completely cease operations there. Since then, the state of Florida and the attorneys for the federal government appealed that decision, and it was then since then been temporarily blocked by a federal appeals court as of I want to say a week or so ago, within this past week. As of now, allows the detention center to continue its operations as the case continues to make its way through the court. That does not mean that it's over and we're just not going to do anything else. We are going to continue to keep fighting this. I think the most important next steps are to, at least from the advocacy side, to continue to uplift the issue, make sure that people know and understand that this isn't over, and we haven't, won or lost yet. Especially with legal and court proceedings, these things can take a while. So it's important to stay tuned in and continue to elevate what is going on. Outside of that, I think, taking actions that might, get some media attention as well. I know outside of the facility, they've been holding weekly vigils, interfaith vigils, each Sunday, I believe, to kind of really bring the community together and offer prayer and thoughts to the folks who are being detained inside the facility, which is, an injustice. But, using it as an opportunity to continue to bring our communities together and show that, while not everybody might be directly threatened by a detention center, whether that be because, you're legally, fine or whatever, you still have, you're still making a show of support for those who are, being unjustly detained in this, facility that is absolutely not fit for anybody to be within.
Thank you for that. I definitely am curious, right? If anyone wants to share, what are y'all hearing? I guess once this ruling passed, what did people in the community react? What conversations are you kind of hearing that folks might have shared with you?
Yeah, I mean, I know that people were really excited to hear that, we had a positive ruling and that this was, they were starting to bust people out and that they were breaking this facility down. And then all of a sudden now it's like, they halted all of that. And so there were key individuals inside who were reporting, what was going on. Now, we're trying to understand who's still inside and who can tell us what, it's going to look like moving forward. I think that, this creates a lot of uncertainty again for our community. We understand that they're looking for other locations in the Panhandle to also replicate this model. So it's not something that was, going to go away in its entirety. And so, we are still keeping an eye out. The lawsuit is really important. The, environmental impacts that this is having on our community and really demonstrating that this is unsafe housing for individuals and for people to be working in. these conditions. So our community is still very concerned, and even more now with the national news and everything that's going on. You can see that our community kind of just goes, just where they need to go, right? If it's home, if it's work, if it's school, but extracurricular activities or being out more than needed is hurting the community, as like right now is not a time to really be, just out and about.
Thank you for that, Caro. Definitely helps us understand, right, like how our community's feeling, the burden, the heavy weight of just existing right now. I can't imagine um, living in fear. And like you said, I'm just trying to get to work. I'm just trying to pick up my kid, right? Making it impossible to just be a person. So thank you for that. I also want to ask Marcelo, what should people understand about Florida's future, both in terms of protecting the environment and defending immigrants' rights, right? Understanding why does this moment, even a month later, or if people are listening to this podcast a few months later, how does this remain historic and urgent?
Yeah, absolutely. I think something I've seen people say a lot is that Florida is the America of tomorrow. So not always kind of showing, especially with things like the stripping back of abortion rights, other issues in which Florida likes to sort of be overboard on, like immigration enforcement, the banning of certain books, the persecution of LGBTQ plus folks. We're seeing that what happens here, the work we do here, will have an impact on the rest of the nation as sort of the the template for what happens when these facilities start to pop up in your states, because this is something that they do want to replicate in other states throughout the nation. So we are having to show that while it does seem, especially in a state like Florida where there's a Republican supermajority, we're having a bit of an uphill battle, but there is still a battle to be fought, and there is still hope in that battle, and that when we come together, we can still win. And even though there are setbacks, and we don't win every fight, it's not just going to be one loss and we're done. We're going to continue to keep fighting and showing up for each other, for our most persecuted and vulnerable communities, and making sure that when they are being threatened, we're there for them. If we don't stand up for others when they're being threatened, who will stand up for us when we are?
And also, I think like something that I would love to add is that the cruelty that they promoted this detention camp with, how people were gonna be surrounded by gators and like this far right influencer saying that they was gonna be like alligators are gonna fist on people. It actually backfired on them because they thought they were gonna like rile up people, and like of course there's some people that do agree with that and some people that do not see the consequences of being cruel online. But a lot of people, especially my generation, like people that I've talked to in colleges and like in the community, they are horrorized about not only the fact that we have this detention center in the Everglades, but also like the way that they're dehumanizing people that are being held in that detention center by not only elected officials, but like podcasters and influencers that they used to follow before, and now they're saying like, "Oh, it's alligator bait" and stuff like that. So at least it backfired on them. How cruel they like painted all this, because it actually riled people up against this.
One more thing I want to just also mention is that I feel like this the facility itself is a very a prime example of intersectionality when it comes to the social justice movement. A lot of in the months leading up to the announcement of this facility being planned and then the construction moving forward, a lot of local politics within Miami-Dade was focused around the ICE 287G agreements being signed between local municipalities and the federal government. And there was a lot of organizing and movement around that. And it was actually in my participation in those local government meetings is where I was able to connect with organizers from ACLU Florida and FLIC, the Florida Immigrant Coalition. We were able to build a relationship. And, by being in those spaces, we were then a bit more prepared. We had those existing connections to then be able to build up a stronger response to the detention center when it did start to, come up and go into operations. And to me, that's just sort of shows what I was talking about earlier and the wider, idea behind intersectionality in the social justice space, in that by being involved in these other issues of social justice, like immigrants' rights, that might not necessarily be, related to protecting the environment, protecting the Everglades. One way or another, it has swung back around to then being a environmental issue as well. So by then, having these connections, we have a stronger case and a stronger coalition in which to fight back.
Yeah, thank y'all for definitely explaining that to me and the listeners, right? And I'm sitting here thinking about how Carolina said earlier, social media can be a powerful tool both to bring people together who might not know. Right, this story blew up on social media. I feel like, and it touched a lot of phones, a lot of screens. But Alejandro, you even had a critical point of it. It can also backfire, right? There's also communities creating violence, and it's like a ripple effect because then people kind of minimize what's actually going on here, and it's like human lives are at stake. They're in unsafe conditions. So I appreciate y'all also kind of bringing that to us, and I invite y'all, right, to check out these organizations that Marcelo mentioned, because without following and supporting all of them, the work won't happen. The work is not, it's not an easy job. And like you said, at the intersection of making sure everyone, all the issues are key stake here, right? All of them impact our people that exist on the planet. Like that is what it is. So I appreciate y'all for sure sharing that with us here today. But I'm curious, like looking ahead, what steps do you believe communities and advocates need to take to ensure public lands are never used again to weaponize in this way? I know we've talked about this being a historical event, not only with this specific event, but we've seen it time and time again. But how can people really open their eyes to this and be critical and be intentional with the things that they plan? I'm gonna say first off, right? It's like making sure that we elect people who are gonna stand up for these intersections. But I'll pass on the mic to y'all. What do you think we can share with listeners today?
I want to add in with what Marcelo said about the 287G agreements and the IGSAs. So we have also been working here in Central Florida, and strongly with our commissioner and our mayor. And for a brief minute there, they had our back on saying like we're not going to move forward, or we're going to look for ways to have to not comply with these 287G agreements because it's costing us more money than what it really is, helping the Floridians or Central Floridians. And as many may not know, Orlando, our jail, is used as a holding facility with the IGSA agreement, which is an intergovernmental agreement that county jails, counties around Central Florida that don't have space to hold immigrants have to be transported to our jail here in Central Florida. And so one thing about what Brianna was saying about how important the elections are, as soon as, our mayor said, okay, I'm going to look into ways for us to not have to comply or to continue doing what we've already been doing because we've already been complying. We've just, it's not an obligation to do this 287G agreement. Well, apparently it is an obligation for all counties to have to do 287G agreements, or they're going to get a call from the attorney general who's going to say, if you don't comply, then, the governor is going to take you and your board out of commission. And so it was like we were going to lose the whole Orange County commissioners and our mayor because they weren't going to comply with what, the current administration wants for the state of Florida. And so we really feel like these midterm elections are going to be super important for us to understand that we have to participate, that we have to choose a governor who's going to really have, the back for all Floridians, not just for certain Floridians. Many of us live in mixed status families, and many of us, are concerned when our loved ones go out. Right now, even when they do have proper documentation, they can be skewed into, something is wrong, or that, they have a traffic violation now that's considered, a huge violation. They're even looking into these being violations that won't allow people to become U.S. citizens. Like they're trying to make it so that it's even more difficult. So, it's really important that we understand that right now, we're trying to save the Florida Everglades because Alejandro has mentioned, how they help the Florida ecosystem, but it's also important to understand our political ecosystem and kind of everything that is working. And our state house legislation begins committee weeks now in October, and we're going to be out advocating. And so one thing that you could definitely do is follow Poder Latinx. Make sure you participate in our advocacy days, and register to vote. Ask your family members if they're registered to vote, and or if they've moved. It's really important that we update our voter registration. It's really important that we know where our current voting poll location is. If you have to re-register to vote by mail, if you didn't receive it in the last election, you're not going to receive it in this one. They have changed it that you have to re-register to vote by mail per election. So there's so much nuances going on. They want to keep our, non-citizens not able to register voters. And luckily, Poder Latinx has won that, and we're able to continue registering voters. They want to keep non-citizens from collecting petitions and being part of, freedom of speech. And luckily, Poder Latinx fights against these things. And we will continue fighting against things like these Everglades detention centers. That is an inhumane way of housing our immigrant brothers and sisters.
And something that I think also the community can do is use our voice. Our voices are the most powerful tools we have. And just like Marcelo and Caro mentioned, look at the impact that news and social media and just peer-to-peer conversations had nationwide and actually worldwide when this detention center opened up and we started seeing the injustices committed inside of it. So actually, like, educating our people, letting them know what's going on is the best tool we have right now to stay informed and actually stand up when something is not right. And also doing it in an informed and unbiased way. Because listen, I know we all have feelings. I know we all have, like, we want to shout up to the sky and like scream or like say whatever we want to say. But when we're having these conversations, it's important to remain cool-headed, speak with facts, not assumptions, and also stay unbiased. So that way you can have a fruitful conversation and we can understand like really what's going on without like villainizing people. So I think that's super important and something that anybody listening can do.
Yeah, one thing I want to add is that on top of everything, we have seen a lot of threats to our public lands, not just with this now them being used as potential foundations for detention centers, but earlier in the year seeing them potentially being sold off for the government to make some cash. We have seen with that a really big uproar from people. The public have been outraged by things like this even being seen as an offer, as something that could happen, because that's part of what makes America and our nation so beautiful, is the fact that we have these lands, these the nature that makes America what it is, and it allows us to not just be in cities or these concrete areas so much, but allow us to really connect with nature. When it comes to defending these resources, one thing that I think is really important is getting organized, or doing that yourself and using that to advocate, starting even at a local level, reaching out to whoever your commissioner or local representative is, both on local and state level, and making that phone call, making that email, because a lot of the times it can be very easy to kind of just assume that somebody else has it handled. But it's better to just, do it yourself just in case, it's not too difficult to make a WhatsApp group, get some friends in there who are, concerned about the same issues, start to build off of that and really become a sort of a force for good and a force for change in your local neighborhood, in your local community, and elevate that as you start to grow and grow. And I think, with organizations like Sierra Club Florida and, our other groups throughout the nation, as well as Poder Latinx and other local orgs, you can look into that as well and see ways that you can be more involved, and really try to make your voice heard in a level that they can't just ignore.
Thank y'all for that. And I, as myself, right, I did a lot of reflecting right now, and even thinking about like looking at the historical context is super important and how we move forward right into time. Thinking about like the first peoples who even occupied the Everglades, I think starting there as well, like, and giving the flowers to the folks that first walked those lands, and now we're using it to weaponize and criminalize people, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to make sure I give them a shout out to the first people's tribes that existed there. I looked it up, right? It's the Seminole, is that correct? Y'all being locals, right? Seminole and the, I want to say this
Miccosukee.
right. Miccosukee, yes. That one's a
Yes.
little bit tougher for me to pronounce,
Yes.
but I just want to recognize them, right, as the first peoples who've occupied that land, and how important it is to remember that we're using public lands, indigenous lands that now are being used in the wrong ways. They were never intended to do that. And so I just want to recognize that, to come back to that. But thank y'all. I do want to give an opportunity. How can people, after hearing all this, what should they do? Where should they take this information? I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues, right, to help me connect the dots for folks who are listening. How can they get involved, both with Sierra Club as well from Florida? I want to make sure that we keep working in solidarity with each other. But yeah, let's talk about what we can do together.
Yeah, I'll go first if that's okay. Before I do, I want to also add that the Miccosukee tribe have been very active and involved in fighting back against the detention center, not only being part of the ongoing lawsuit, but members of the tribe have taken the lead really on organizing some of the protests and actions outside of the facility before it even started being built. I want to make a specific shout out to Betty Osceola, who's a very active advocate for the Everglades and a member of the Miccosukee tribe as well. And she's been just really instrumental in elevating the voice of those whose lands those are, and I've been very lucky to be able to support the work that she's been doing, and I'm hoping that through the work and everyone being able to unite behind each other, we're able to continue to fight and eventually get this facility closed down, and hopefully have a wider conversation on the intersectionality when it comes to environmental and immigrant rights and other social justice issues. That being said, you can go to Sierra Club Florida. Sierra Club. We have a sierraclub.org/Florida is our website, and you can sign up for our mailing list there. You can also follow us on our social medias. It should be Sierra Club FL on just about everything to stay up to date. And depending on where you are in the state, we have different local groups. I work pretty frequently alongside the Miami group. We have our local campaign, which is our Don't Incinerate, Innovate campaign, to try to prevent the creation of any new waste incinerators in Miami-Dade. And we have other campaigns throughout the state as well that you can get involved in. And, there's on top of that, most recently working against the bear hunt going on, doing what we can to prevent that and hopefully minimize the amount of damage done there. But we also try to do events that take advantage of, the real Florida, as we like to call it, getting people outdoors, going out to the Everglades, Biscayne Bay, Big Cypress, doing hikes, kayaking, swamp walks, things like that, to really be able to enjoy all these areas that we are also working to preserve and protect.
Thank you. I know I got to get out there and go to Florida and see the beautiful lands. Like, the photos are just, I'm always taken away. It's amazing. But I definitely want to share the space with Alejandro or Carolina if you want to leave our listeners with anything of how we can encourage them.
Yeah, I'll go next, and I'll leave it to Alejandro to close us out. The bears, as we've seen, we've grown so extensively, and our housing, we're continuing to need more housing, and it's very important to protect, our community, and we've seen it here too in Seminole County a lot, in Longwood, where bears start to, be our neighbors because we've inhabited their homes. So it's very sad when we hear about, what's going on, and that, recent law has passed that, we can hunt bears. It was something that I know Alejandro was very advocate about. Like, we have to protect the bears. There's so much that needs to protect in Florida. We need to protect each other. We need to protect the environment, and we just need to continue working together. I really liked and kind of want to stress the point that Marcelo mentioned about working together in community with a lot of other organizations. The importance of, being part of coalition spaces. We are part of, Immigrants Are Welcome Here coalition that encompasses many of the organizations that Marcelo has mentioned. And, we're continuing to work with environmental groups as well to make sure that, Florida is habitable for all of us and that we feel safe. And so we invite you again to visit poderlatinx.org and that you like us and follow us on social media and come out to our events. And we look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, and we actually have a bunch of like really cool events coming up. So for Florida Climate Week, we're gonna be doing another green tour. We're gonna be driving people around on electric vehicles and bringing them to a super great location that we will announce very soon. And pretty much, we want people to experience the beauty that is the Florida wetlands and also the technology of electric vehicles. We're also going to have different talks about environmental justice, how can people get involved. So please, like Caro mentioned, don't miss that. Go on our website, on our social media, and we'll definitely be posting about it.
Thank you all. And I definitely look forward to this partnership, right? I would invite anyone who's listening in and watching us. There is a seat at the table for you. You just got to show up and be active. We're never not going to invite you, right? The space is for everyone and everyone who wants to advocate and help not only our public lands, but people, and making sure that our safety comes first and that we're also being mindful of the space that we're taking up in the world. So I'll leave it at that. Again, very grateful for all of y'all joining us today, right? Thank you again, Sierra Club and Poder Latinx Florida, for joining us. The work that y'all do, it's not easy, and I want to give you our flowers with everything that's been going on in the world, right? Thank you for the work that you do. We highly appreciate you. Give a comment down below, right? Like, thank you. Send us a flower emoji. This work's not easy. It can get heavy, but even then, like, find spaces for you, right? Create communities. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. And that's the end of that episode. Thank you all again for joining us. Marcelo, you're always welcome to come back onto the Eco Poder podcast. You already know this is your home away from home. Happy to have you. Looking forward to working together and continuing this good fight. But thank y'all. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you.
Brought to you by Climate Action Campaign and Poder Latinx.